A very good evening to you. Welcome to this evening's episode of The Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvogo. As tensions continue to mount in the KwaZulu-Natal town of Phoenix, we speak to the province's premier about what needs to be done urgently to prevent the situation from deteriorating further. Sihle Zikalala is our first guest. And with at least 7.2 million South Africans now unemployed, calls are getting louder for the government to implement a basic income grant. The big question, though, has been, where is the money going to come from? Well, an economics think tank has crunched the numbers and has put on the table some proposals. The Institute for Economic Justice takes us through their findings 5 days after President Cyril Ramaphosa hinted that the basic income grant matter was now receiving the government's attention. We'll round off the evening with a broader conversation with other activists on the country's alarming poverty levels. The Watchdog starts now.
My husband at the moment is in hospital. His car got burnt in Phoenix while he was going to fill up petrol. They took him out of his car, they beat him, he broke his left arm and left leg. In fact, I don't see any justice that is being done, because there is no perpetrators who are being arrested at the moment.
The first guy hits me with the gun here in the forehead, and then they started taking all the bush knives and the golf sticks, everything, every weapon you may think they're trying to hit me. I asked them, why, hey guys, why are you hitting us? They said, one guy told me that you don't know that Phoenix is on lockdown for 5 days. We don't want any black guy.
Not everybody were armed. There were people inside our communities were sitting on each end of the roads, guarding what they have.
Testimonies of people who have been caught in the violence and destruction that happened in Phoenix. We're joined now by the Premier of the province of KwaZulu-Natal, Sihle Zikalala. Premier, good evening. Thanks very much for your time this evening.
Thank you, and thanks for having us in your program.
How would you describe the situation in Phoenix right now as we speak?
Well, I think currently we can say the situation is normal and stable. But we must say that what have happened in Phoenix is, in fact, an embarrassment to all of us and should have not happened anywhere in our country. It is clear that in 1994, when we entered the democratic dispensation, embracing the Rainbow Nation, we thought that racism will be quickly addressed. However, we seem to have not gotten to the root causes and the expression of racism and racial tension. And what find expression during the unrest in Phoenix was uncalled for, and it's a reflection of what we need to urgently attend to as the South African society and KwaZulu-Natal in particular.
So you agree with some within the ANC, among the people who marched on the ANC offices, where people were saying that incident has everything to do with racism. So you are agreeing with them?
Fully agree with them, as they were saying. And surprisingly and unfortunately so, some of the people who were killed on the main road that is in Phoenix. That it's where people go to filling stations when they want fuel, but that's a road that connects Inanda to the road that comes from Mhlanga going toward the airport side. Now, if you will say people can't drive through that road, and you say you don't want anyone in Phoenix, you mean that you are now taking our country back to the era of the Group Areas Act, which were phased out before even 94. And South Africa belongs to all who live in it, and all people have a right to reside in all places, in places of their choice.
In fact, there's a sense one got. I mean, our team was there this morning. The morning team, the morning live team was there this morning, and there's a sense that if it was armed white community members who erected roadblocks in Phoenix, preventing people who didn't look like them from entering, the attitude of politicians would have been completely different from what we have seen so far. What do you say about people who are making that particular point?
Well, anyone has a right to make his or her view, but I don't believe that we have been found wanting or not straight on this issue. Right from the beginning, as the government of KwaZulu-Natal, we were clear that killing is not accepted. We were clear that racial intolerance and racial violence is not accepted anywhere, whether it is done by Africans, coloreds, or Indians, or even whites. And we are for the truly non-racial society. And that's what we have been emphatic on. But we cannot reject analysis and the views of other people. If they've got views that are factual, we will engage with those views. But from where we stand, that is not correct.
Now, the people who marched on the ANC's provincial office to deliver a memorandum also say, in other words, apart from the racism accusations that they're leveling, they also say that the, and I quote, unconstitutional arrest of the former President Jacob Zuma without trial is also to blame here, and they are asking you, their leaders, to, and I quote, make a pronouncement against the unconstitutional jailing of the former president. Are you going to accede to that demand?
Well, we will engage with structures, as you are saying that they submitted to the ANC leadership the memorandum. Firstly, we will engage with structures on that memorandum. As the ANC, we believe that in this case in particular, there are a number of issues that would have been handled different. We believe that it would have been better and it would have saved the situation if, when former president lodged a request for recusal of the chairperson of the commission, if that recusal was listened and maybe given a benefit of the doubt, and then get someone to chair at that particular time only, that would have assisted us to avert what we've seen. But secondly, we also believe that when the Constitutional Court called on the former president to go before Zondo Commission, if he cooperated, we would have averted the situation. So we don't want to look on one side. We are analyzing this matter holistically, and we would want to take a comprehensive look, not a one-sided view.
You don't think that, the onus was perhaps more on the part of the former president to do the right thing, and that the leader should have known better, that things can be chaotic if they are not properly managed and people are not are being led?
Well, there is one thing that we always say. It is good to analyze, but if, when you talk about if, you will say that doesn't win, because you now analyze something that have already taken place, and it is part of history. We must learn from that experience that we could handle the situation differently, and I think rigidity from either side should have not happened in this case.
Now, you've also spent the past couple of days visiting the people of Phoenix and, of course, other areas like our team did this morning. What did you take away from the conversations you heard with some of the victims and their families?
Well, firstly, the people want to see justice done. And I think they are genuine and correct. Most of the communities who are affected here come from Ward 57 and 53 as well as, I think, 56. But most of them are saying, we want to see justice done. And they don't want a revenge on their own. They are law-abiding citizens. And we support that. And that's why we want to applaud a little progress that we have seen, where at least up to now, 5 people have been arrested. And that shows that there is a progress. But we want to see this getting more deeper and deeper up until all of them are arrested, prosecuted, and sentenced for this. And we will follow this. We will continue to follow this case and ensure that it reaches its logical conclusion. But also, from both sides, there is that willingness to reconcile, as they have formed through the Minister of Police. They formed a peace committee composed of 5-5, and we are intervening through our program of social cohesion, where we want to encourage more integration between racial groups that are in tension and ensure that they eventually coexist, live together in harmony.
Let me bring into the conversation here some contributions from people who are watching. I Am T-Man says, it's simple. Those who are driving around looking for any black person to shoot should be arrested and sent to jail. Some took videos of themselves shooting at people who just happened to be black in the streets. Easy evidence. We have Squai saying Phoenix matter is not about game but needs people to work together. I listened to news day in and day out on community radio stations, and people there are angry and fed up with this government. People, please work with Mama Kaula for EFF on this matter, and please be genuine because black people are angry. I'll read you the last one and then ask for your comment just on the tweets. Ask him why not arrest Indians who killed 200 black people. Premier?
Well, I think the most relevant question is the last one. And I think why not arresting Indians? They have been arrested. Right now, they are in jail, and we would want to see more arrests taking place. And that's why we are all hands-on on this matter. We must applaud the team that have been assigned by Minister Pigitele for the work that they have been doing. We must applaud the Minister as well as MEC Nkonyeni for continuously going to Phoenix, engaging with police, and ensuring that the investigation is expedited. And I think that is important. We are on the ground. We are working with people there. We have met even with the bereaved families. We've met with community structures, and we will continue to work with all of them. Firstly, to deal with this matter and ensure that perpetrators are brought to books. But secondly, we must ensure that there is also support for the victims and bereaved families. And thirdly, we must work on ensuring proper reconciliation in that area.
Speaking of proper reconciliation, that peace committee that the minister has set up, comprising of the leadership of all 4 communities in the area, Have they started doing any real meaningful work?
Indeed, they've started meeting, and we are going to complement, as I have said, because in the province we have the Moral Regeneration and Social Cohesion Council, which is chaired by the Premier, and the Deputy is Bishop Ruben Phillips. We're working on the plan to ensure that in all of these areas, we also assist as the provincial leadership. I must also indicate that Phoenix was severely affected, but other areas too were affected. If you talk about Chatsworth, about 13 people died from the areas that are surrounding Chatsworth. We are equally following those incidents. If you talk about this also in Pietermaritzburg, number of people were killed, and we are following on that. And we would want to see all of these things being addressed, perpetrators being arrested and prosecuted.
Now, speaking of plans, but also of the other areas, and indeed we should be saying the whole of KZN, schools are about to reopen. Those whose businesses were affected need to get back to work before jobs are lost, forever. What then is the plan of the provincial government going forward?
We have developed a plan which got 2 phases. Phase 1 is to look on what is immediate, and then phase 2 look on the short to long term. In terms of what is immediate, we are working especially with the Department of Education, MEC Mshengu, to ensure that by Monday we've got all schools ready for reopening and students going back to classes. We are going to provide temporary structures that will assist in schools that have been vandalized and cannot be used. We are working on trying to resuscitate the economy, and we have met with the various sectors. We met at the level of the Economic Council, which is a structure created or composed of the labor, the business sector, the civil society, and ourselves as government. We have developed a plan. The first in that plan is to ensure security and protection. And that's what we're going to do, and ensure that all people who goes to work and companies are protected. But secondly is to begin to look on issues of safety around industrial parks. And that is what we will be doing. And thirdly, we will be looking on how to support those industries, those companies that have been affected. Some will need some capital injection, such as loans and all of that. We are putting in place the program to assist them in this situation. Then the long term is to then start also complementing the drive that we have been on, of ensuring that we reposition KwaZulu-Natal as a hub for investment, especially targeting the African market. We've got a clear export strategy that focuses to Africa, and we've got a plan of building our SMMEs and local companies targeting Africa. And as part of that, in October, we will, if the situation allows us in terms of COVID-19, we will host the Intra-Africa Trade Fair, which is coordinated by the African Union together with African Bank and the African Development Bank.
Premier, that's why we're going to leave it for this evening. Thanks very much for coming through.
Thanks, Vuyo, and thanks for having us in your program. Thank you.
That is the Premier of KwaZulu-Natal, Sihle Zikalala, talking specifically about the situation in Phoenix, but also more broadly about what they hope to do over the next few days and weeks to deal with the violence and the impact of the violence there in that part of our country. After the break, we talk to Dr. Gillard Isaacs from the Institute for Economic Justice, Isabel Fry from the Studies in Poverty and Inequality Institute, and General Moyo from Pay the Grants. The topic, the basic income grant. Where is the money going to come from? That's coming up in a moment. Welcome back. This is the Watchdog. Now, with at least 7.2 million South Africans now unemployed, calls are getting louder for the government to implement a basic income grant. The big question, though, has been, where is the money going to come from? Well, an economics think tank has crunched the numbers and has put on the table some proposals. The Institute for Economic Justice takes us through their findings 5 days after President Cyril Ramaphosa hinted that the basic income matter was now receiving the government's attention. We will, of course, round off the discussion with a broader conversation with two other activists on the country's alarming poverty levels. Dr. Isaacs, thanks very much for your time. Take us very briefly through some of the key things that your proposal is putting on the table that are answering the particular question of where is the money going to come from?
Evening, thanks very much. I think it's useful to start by saying how much money do we actually need here? And that is depends on the level of the income grant and how wide it reaches. But from our calculations, if you start, say, at a lower end of a food poverty line for everyone between 18 and 59 who's not formally employed, that's about 160 billion rand a year. Mm-hmm. If you offer it to everyone between the ages of 18 and 59, that's about 240. Now, obviously, it goes up if you have the income grant at higher levels. To the highest level, which we look at, is for the overall poverty line, which for everyone would be about 520 billion, which is obviously would be a significant chunk. Mm-hmm. So we look more at the kind of lower half and explore some tax financing measures. The first and sort of newest measure which we suggest is a social security tax, which is essentially similar to like a UIF tax, but it is levied at a progressive rate. So it is higher on the higher earners and lower on the lower income earners. And that we model to raise around 60 billion rand annually. It's important to say there that although everyone's paying this tax, lower income earners who are receiving this grant every month are still better off because they receive it and are being taxed at a much lower level.
Now, added to that social security tax, you also advocating for the removal of tax breaks for higher income earners and corporations.
Absolutely. So the wealthy in South Africa receive a range of tax breaks. In particular, we explore the pension tax breaks and the medical aid tax credits, where you and I are receiving benefits for either investing in our retirement or from enjoying private medical aid. and we explore those, and you can raise about 55 billion rand by eliminating those.
Another proposal is of taxes, introduction of taxes on financial transactions.
Yeah, so I mean, this has gained popularity worldwide after the financial crisis. The idea of either taxing currency transactions or financial taxes as a whole. And this would both reduce financial market speculation and allow one to raise significant revenue there. Another important tax which we investigate is a wealth tax, which is a tax not levied on a transaction, but on the stock of wealth which we hold.
Now, I'm sure you would have heard about this even before you put this out there in the public domain, because from the three we've spoken about now, you add a resource rent tax, you add a wealth tax. I'm going to talk about wasteful expenditure a little later on. But if you take these top five, I mean, it would seem that you are going to burden, or the proposal is going to burden further what is an already, very small pool, of people from which we need to finance all our priorities. And, it's going to be a problem.
Yeah, well, I think it's important to first say that, in fact, everyone pays tax. It isn't only a small pool, because every purchase, or almost everyone, it is VAT charged, and that's about a third of government income, which means that whether it's me or whether it's someone who is living in poverty, everyone's paying tax. But yes, we do explore a number of options which would have a bearing on those paying personal income tax. We are not saying that we should necessarily levy all of these taxes at the same time at the outset. I would assume that in the first year, a portion of this grant would need to be financed by additional general expenditure from the fiscus. But what we are saying is that, and we've looked at 18 options here, that there is a combination of options here which we need to explore, and those need to be implemented in a way in which it is going to be sustainable and also raise necessary revenue. It's important to put this in a context where people earning in my or your bracket are paying a significantly lower rate now than in the year 2000, for instance. We have been the beneficiaries of ongoing tax reductions. And yes, the wealthier, higher income earners in South Africa are going to have to step up and have their taxes increased, and in a society of extraordinary inequality, have those funds used to finance income for the masses in South Africa who do not have access to sustainable income.
Let me bring in Buddy Wells here on Twitter, who says that great paper, but is there any reason the paper makes no mention of the option of direct monetary low interest financing of the basic income grant by the South African Reserve Bank?
So we have argued, and I think that it's right, that the Reserve Bank has a strong developmental role to play in our economy. In particular, I would like to see low interest financing for our development finance institutions, for the South African Development Bank, IDC, for small business support. So there is certainly a scope for the Reserve Bank to be a source of low interest financing, including potentially in low interest loans to the state. But ultimately, Social Security funding is an aspect of funding from the fiscus, and the fiscus is raised either in debt issuance or in taxation, and those are the two main options which we're exploring.
Just lastly, the issue of reduction in wasteful expenditure. Have you been able to put a figure to that? Have you crunched the numbers to a point where you are able to say this is how much we can save from what we already have, and how much that would give us?
Well, we know from the AG's report last year that there was about 120 billion in irregular expenditure. Now, not all of that is corrupt per se.
Yes.
Because some of that might be legitimate spending, but in ways which aren't in compliance with the Public Finance Acts. So we estimate rather at about a third of that, which we think is a safe estimate for what is certainly being misspent there. And that comes to about 36 billion rand per year.
Okay, we're going to take a quick ad break, Dr. Isaacs, and in a short while we're going to be joined in this conversation by Isabel Fry from the Studies in Poverty and Inequality Institute, as well by General Moyo from the Pay the Grants. Don't go away. Welcome back. This is the Watchdog, and we're now joined by Isabel Fry from the Studies in Poverty and Inequality Institute and General Moyo from the Pay the Grants. Good evening to both of you, and welcome. Thanks very much for joining us. You heard what Dr. Isaacs had to say about the number crunching that the Institute for Economic Justice has done. Just your thoughts of what he has just put before us. Isabel? You can unmute yourself.
Sorry, I'm still not adept at this, so thank you very much for the invitation. And it was really good to hear the figures from Institute for Economic Justice. Getting information out there into the public domain is really what is essential. I think from our perspective at Studies in Poverty and Inequality Institute, what we have been increasingly concerned about is the fact that the conversation about the affordability of basic income grant needs to be located primarily in an investigation about the current levels of poverty in South Africa. Mm-hmm. So 2 weeks ago, there was new data released by NIDS CRAB saying that 13 million South Africans are living in hunger, 3 million of those being children. We also see that hunger is one of the prime drivers of children not attending school. So two things there for us are important. Firstly, what we're seeing is that people's current needs, developmental as well as basic needs, are not being met. But we're also seeing a disassociation of people in the future. So one, the humanitarian crisis, but secondly, the developmental crisis. As our next generation of income earners, of workers, are not getting the requisite kind of developmental skills that they need. So for us last week, the tragedy that our country was engulfed with last week also had a very dangerous element to it, and that was saying, where is people's hope in the future? So the question, coming back to the IEJ's data that was released, we need to be seeing the question of how we get the blending of finance, because for us it doesn't seem that the question is there going to be a basic income grant anymore? There clearly is a need for an intervention that disrupts the economic malaise. I mean, don't forget, Vuyo, that before COVID, we had 5 years of negative economic growth. So the economy was not in a healthy state at all. Levels of poverty were rising. Inequality was rising. I mean, Gillard spoke about a wealth tax to fund a basic income grant. South Africa's wealth inequality is at 0.9, one being complete inequality. Income inequality is slightly less, but still a global outlier at 0.63. So we see that there is dysfunction. We see the fact that that employment is no longer the distributor of sufficient income for people to live a decent standard of living, to the point that people's investment in the future is not something that they see has any returns. So what do we do nationally? And that seems to be the introduction of a universal basic income grant that is sufficient to act not only to meet people's humanitarian needs, but as that springboard for future development, the multiplier that then needs to be captured through rural development and other schemes, so that the investment of the state every month into the economy is then attracted and captured positively by other developmental interventions.
Why do you think that is not the case? Because I'm asking this because there is a reality. The people who control the purse at cabinet usually are more powerful, and their voice is the one that gets heard first, if the other voices in fact get to be heard at all. And I'm also asking this at the back of my mind. There is something that keeps on playing, which I heard from the former statistician general Padili Hotla a couple of weeks ago, where he said that South Africa, or those in power, have been desperate to, come up with this good story to tell, to a point where figures of 13 million people who live in hunger, are always, that situation is always downplayed, because there is this enthusiasm, zest, to actually tell a good story, ignoring the hard realities of millions of people who are, living in poverty. Isabel?
Thank you, Vuyo. I've been troubled by this question for many months. And on the one hand, I think that National Treasury is very aware of the burden of running a clean fiscus. So they're very sort of absorbed by the planning, the 3-year rolling budget that we have, and the need to keep coherency within that. The concerns about presenting to the world the fact that we have a stable, predictable planning cycle. And so in a way, it's the cycle itself rather than the content that absorbs them. Because we've had a number of meetings with them over recent days, weeks and months, where we've put the narrative that the figures themselves present and say, we need to look at this urgently. And ultimately, what we hear is, they're the technocrats. They're not the ones who make the policy. So the question then needs to be addressed, where is that policy made? Where are the political choices made that determine what the fiscus actually releases? And that question, the issue that Paddy raised is interesting, because you can understand that politicians want to tell a good story. But there is the flip side of that, is that the obligation on the shoulders of the politicians, not the technocrats, is to make the bold decisions that actually address the needs of the country. So it's nice to tell a good story, but I mean, if you just take, for instance, the unemployment statistics. So there's a national unemployment statistic, which is known as the sort of official stat, and then there's a broader definition. So then the national official statistic excludes from the numbers all those people who've given up looking for jobs. So you might see that the unemployment figure sort of sits mid-30s, but if you take on everybody who is unemployed, you see it sitting in the 40s. So our concern as people who are working around the policy issues, that policymakers actually have to know the truth. They have to absorb the truth. in order to reach the scale of the intervention. And so that actually answers to an extent your own question, which is why are people not running to embrace this intervention, which we see as being such an incredible way of meeting people's needs. And that's because we don't always want to hear the full extent of the crisis. I think that last week, people took that opportunity and they said to people nationally, this is what our reality, this is what we're feeling. We're no longer statistics that can be shuffled around and moved into more palatable narratives. People are saying, please hear us, please listen to us. And that really is the opportunity that we face now. To an extent, I mean, the work that IEJ and SPI and other organizations do is feeding the information that decision makers need. But the robustness and the boldness of the decision has to lie within the ruling party, the ones for whom people vote, the ones that people have invested their future in. And it's time for tough decisions. It's time for the leadership that is expected. In Mandela Month, we look back to the kinds of really bold decisions that people made when we were in similar crises in the 80s, in the 90s in this country. And we believe that the cost of not taking these bold decisions now will be regretted going forward in the ways that we don't want to comprehend.
General, let me bring you in here, but before I do that, here's a tweet from COSATU, which says it demands that the Solidarity Fund contributions to focus on township economy and help the indigent communities. Just your thoughts, having listened to what Dr. Isaacs put before us earlier. General, can you hear me?
Thanks. Yes, I can hear you. You can hear me? Am I audible?
Yes, I'm hearing you now.
Yes, thank you. I think what Dr. Isaacs and other researchers like him have been putting forward for many years, and for many research of a similar nature that have been conducted, is the very same issues that we've been raising as the Pay the Grants campaign, to say now we are in this situation because the politicians are still ignorant and are not willing to listen to what the realities on the ground are. In that, the situation that we've seen a couple of weeks back have actually been the situation that we've been alerting the state to say, you know, even before they cutted this SRD grant, to say, this is the situation that we are saying. The only remedy to the skyrocketing poverty, inequality in the country, the only remedy for now is the full implementation of this basic income grant. And they've been ignoring that to such an extent that people like Mr. Isaacs and others like Isabel, Dumakubule, and others that have substantiated our call and made a substantiative research and came up with genuine research that have proven to government that this is a possible thing, is doable, and it can be done. But since we know that the politicians are not willing, it's not to say this is difficult or it cannot be done, but it's the political unwillingness, as they want to use this BIG or basic income guarantee as a political scoring point game, as they normally do.
Are you not convinced that perhaps slowly, but the wheel is indeed turning in a recognizable direction? I mean, comments that were made by the president last weekend, for example, point to a great deal of positivity that they may be keen to embrace the concept of a basic income grant, but of course subject to a lot of things being established, the biggest among those things being the affordability issue.
I think the research that I'm referring to and that have been presented by many researchers have proven in several occasions that this doesn't require any more delays. It can be done at the end of this month. It can be done last month, before even the termination of the social relief grant on the 30th of April. The president was supposed to consider that before termination. That was little. That was at least bringing some kind of a hope to some communities that were so disparate in the situation that is appalling to them. But by terminating that without any implementation, but still talking about this thing, not having any proper plans of implementation, that also another delay which is unnecessary. The talks have been there for many years, even before Corona. But the problem is the implementation. This government is good in drafting policies, but poor in terms of implementation. So these talks will take us another year or two. It might be a sweet talk for now, but it's not a good story as it is being delayed to many suffering people. We are here, the statistics are saying 13 million people are in a dire situation, in extreme poverty levels, but those talkings won't be helping them on the ground as we speak.
Dr. Isaacs, your institution has been involved, from the start of, from the very word-go when we're hit by this coronavirus pandemic. You were playing a very significant role in crunching the numbers and in agitating, of course, together with your fellow panelists, agitating for relief for poor people. Also, when there was talk of stopping the grants, you were agitating for the grants to continue, and there again, you were involved in the number crunching game. Just from the experience of the past 18 months, where are the problem areas? What makes the government a bit more, shall we say, reluctant or resistant to some of these ideas? Have you been able to put a finger on it?
So it's a great question, Vera, and I think there's a path dependency. There's a sort of natural flow with economic policy making in South Africa, which has evolved over time, and that's been a cautious, conservative, financially restrictive kind of a mindset, and that sits most acutely with in National Treasury, who we understand were the obstacle to the various extensions of the SRD grant at the outset, who were the initial obstacle in the rollout of emergency relief measures. But of course, it's not isolated there. But we are, South African policy making is sort of stuck 10, 15 years behind where international thinking around how we stimulate and grow economies are. And that comes from sort of ideological and particular understandings of the world, but it also comes from fear of financial markets, rating agencies, and so on.
Okay. Isabel, we've run out of time, but quick concluding comments from you. What do people who are thinking the way all three of you think, what should like-minded people be doing now to be able to influence these things to move with a greater speed?
Thank you. Well, a number of us are trying to create platforms where people can articulate a combined call. I think it's really critical that everybody who is sympathetic to this articulates a call through social media, as well as through letters to the President, particularly, and to the Minister of Social Development. People's demands for some kind of social justice intervention of the scale of a universal basic income grant need to happen immediately. We don't want people to have to take to the streets in violent protest to be heard again. So it is about saying that we are in solidarity with people who feel that they have no future hope without an intervention of this level, making that call.
Okay, quick closing comments from you, General.
Yeah, from our side as the Payday Grants campaign, we are considering many avenues like the legal avenue, in terms of taking the government to court if it's not going to consider this implementation of the BIG. But we are also going to explore our avenue that we normally know, that there's the only way that the government listens, which is the protest, but not the kind of a protest that many will fear to join us, because we've never been in a disruptive protest, but we've been submitting letters, making pickets, and writing to the president. So that's what we're going to do, and keep on putting pressure from below. That's what we're going to organize, mobilize communities to rally behind this campaign, and other experts like Dr. Isaacs and the others.
And that's where we're going to leave it. Thanks to all three of you, Dr. Gillard Isaacs from the Institute for Economic Justice, Isabel Fry from the Studies in Poverty and Inequality Institute, and General Moyo from the Pay the Grants. Sobering numbers there. More than 7 million South Africans are unemployed. About 13 million South Africans live in hunger. Sobering statistics, something that each and every one of us needs to think about. And that's where we're going to leave it this evening. Do join us again on Monday, 8 o'clock sharp. From me and the team, have a great weekend.